A lot of software engineers and a lot of firmware engineers, we're socially awkward. So when we talk, we sound something like this. Yeah, okay, yeah. Alright folks, welcome back to Ugo the Engineer's channel, and today's episode we'll quickly talk about the 8 skills that you need to be the absolute best engineer in the world. I consider myself the best engineer in the world, and it's time for you to be the best engineer in the world. There are 8 skills you got to have, and what are they? Well, let's talk about it. Number 1 skill that you need is communication skills. A lot of software engineers and a lot of firmware engineers, we're socially awkward. So when we talk, we sound something like this. Yeah, okay, yeah. And from someone else's point of view, they don't understand what you're saying. So the key to having great communication skills is speak boldly, speak proudly with your chest out, right? That's how you got to sound when you talk. Second thing you got to keep in mind is when you're speaking, try visioning yourself from somebody else's point of view. How do I sound? You know what you're gonna say because obviously in your head, you know what you're gonna say. But unfortunately, the other person that you're talking to, they do not know what you're gonna say. So it might get kind of like, twisty. Second skill you gotta have is being able to read and write specifications. What are specifications? Specification basically is some sort of document that says, what are you gonna work on? Before you even start working on any product, before you start writing code or doing whatever you got to do, you got to have a piece of paper that says, this is what I plan on doing. This is what I plan on accomplishing. This is how I plan to accomplish it. Doesn't have to be all professional. Doesn't have to be 1,000 pages long. Even if it's half a page, that's fine. The third skill you got to learn how to do is being able to read and also write schematics. Now, what is a schematic? A schematic is very similar to a specification. However, a schematic is a documentation that talks about how electric will flow through your product. So the specification talks about what you're gonna do. The schematics talks about how electricity or how electric flows through the so-called product that you're gonna be working on. Fourth thing you gotta learn to be the best engineer, right, is you gotta learn how electric flows. Do you understand current? Do you understand voltages? Do you understand power? You also have to be able to identify different electric components. What's this? It's a battery. What about this? What's this? Yeah, it's a capacitor. How about this? What's this? This is just a hand sanitizer. It's not an electrical component. What's this? Yep, it's a MOSFET. Number 5 things you got to learn is learning how to code. I mean, that's kind of obvious. You want to be an engineer, you want to be a software engineer, firmware engineer, of course you got to learn how to code. Now, typically in the embedded field, in the firmware or hardware designing field, we typically use C and C++. You can use any language, it doesn't really matter. Any language works as long as your product or your code is doing what you want it to do. Now, generally speaking, 90% of the time when you're doing embedded work, when you're programming firmware, you will use C or C++. So what are the most common things in embedded C and C++? There's something known as ISR, which is interrupt service routine. There's something known as volatile memory. And also there's something known as your main loop. You gotta have a main loop. That main loop could be an RTOS, which kind of schedules what's gonna happen. This is a short video. After this quick short video, I'm gonna make a longer part, like a part 2, where I go into details and explain everything out. 6th thing you gotta learn is understanding communication protocols. So when you're making this so-called device, you're gonna have different parts. For instance, you're gonna have a main chip, a screen, a GPS, a button. For these 2 things to communicate with each other, we typically use stuff known as communication protocols. I'll give you some examples. I2C, SPI, CAN, UART. Those are the protocols that computer parts use to talk to each other. For instance, if you've got some data in your RAM and you want to push that data to your CPU, they talk to each other through a protocol called SPI. Now, the seventh thing you got to learn is learn how to use scopes such as oscilloscopes, logic analyzers, and multimeter. What do those three things do? They actually help you see how electricity is flowing. So remember the number three thing we talked about having a schematic that shows how electric flows. Now, scopes will actually help you see and make sure that your electric is flowing how you intended it to move. Finally, the last thing you got to learn how to do is learn how to solder. Some people say solder, some people say solder. Based on your accent, I have an accent, so when I say it, I say solder. Soldering is like a skill that you got to have because you got to put parts together, especially when you're prototyping, kind of like what I have here. You got to learn how to solder so you can put your own prototypes together. This is just a quick short video. I'm gonna make a part 2 that's gonna be way longer, that will go into details into every single one of these. Thanks guys.